What is a homesteader? Well, that's a pretty good question. Good morning. What you doing? When I started the Homesteaders of America organization, it really stemmed out of a place of being called something other than a homesteader. I get that a homesteader is kind of just a label, but over and over again, I'd heard from snarky people or people who just wanted to be mean saying, well, that's not really what a homesteader is. And so I began my search of what exactly is a homesteader. My concept of homesteader, which is really what the concept is for a lot of people, is that you have to have this huge farm and grow everything that you need off of this homestead. Make your clothes, can all your food, all these types of things. And what happened was I talked to a lot of elders and even my grandparents and discovered that that's not necessarily what a homesteader is at all. At the 2017 Homesteaders of America conference, Joel Salatin got up on the stage and he told us exactly what a homesteader is. And he defined the word in two different parts, the word home and the word steader. And the word home obviously means your dwelling, your building, and the word steader is the opposite of, or the same as, instead, meaning altogether that a homesteader is somebody whose focus is on the home. That's it. And in fact, the Webster's Dictionary doesn't even define homesteader as anything other than someone whose focus is on the home and who has outbuildings. So really, a lot of people who don't have farm animals could be homesteaders. When I asked my grandma what their farm was like when she was growing up, now she was a homesteader, but they had animals, they had a milk cow, bees, lots of things where they made money off of their farm. But you know what? They didn't make everything. I've talked about this before in a lot of videos and blog posts. And the reality is that a homesteader was somebody who wanted to be more self-sufficient and live a more self-sufficient lifestyle. In fact, the homesteaders throughout history weren't what we think they were at all. They didn't live in the Stone Ages. They still frequented stores. They still had to buy their flour. I mean, think of how much wheat you would need to grind your own flour. They still had to go to the store or depend on a local farmer to buy their wheat so that they could grind it themselves. There's a lot of homesteaders doing that today. They bartered with other people. They traded. They didn't have or do everything that they had to do on their homestead. And in today's society, what happens is we lack from the knowledge of history because we have in our mind these little movies or whatever where we think we know everything there is about homesteading, but the reality is that homesteaders back then are a lot like us now. Now certainly there were exceptions. There could have been a lot of poverty which drove somebody to homesteading. There could have been a lot of people who went without, and obviously that is an exception. Today we have people who go without too, especially in homesteading. But it wasn't this doom or gloom or do and die type thing. It was just a normal way of life. So what did homesteading look like back then? That's a good question. So it looked a lot like growing your own produce. That was the one thing that homesteaders could do no matter where they were. They would grow their own produce. They would raise their own meat, whether it was chickens or rabbits or lamb or goat. They would do a lot of that stuff on their own. some of them made their own clothes. If you go back to Ma and Pa Ingalls' time, there you go. They did a lot of things on their own. But if we want to talk about real people, real life, very much connected to you right here, right now, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, then I can tell you that my grandma, sure, they made certain clothes, but a lot of times they went to the store. A lot of times they went to get things that they needed. So they would, like I said, they'd go get wheat to grind. They had an ice box guy. He would actually bring cuts of ice to their house for their ice box. Instead of having a refrigerator, they had a spring box. So they actually had a box in the spring or in the river where they would store all their milk and cheese and cold stuff. And then they eventually got an ice box where you actually had to put ice in the box and to keep all their stuff. Now, my grandma can tell you lots of stories, and I really hope that I can get her on camera one day. But her mom would wake up in the morning and go to bed at night super early and super late just to can food. Meats, stews, vegetables, everything that they produced from their homestead. But they still had a very normal life. Now, my ancestors, we have ancestors that lived in Shenandoah National Park before it was a national park, and they were actually driven off of their homesteads from the park to make room for this national attraction. And these people lived a little bit more in poverty, but they didn't have a better life because they lived in poverty and because they had a homestead. In fact, they lacked a lot, and so even they still had to drive into town. We have this huge misconception that in the Great Depression, everybody did everything. But that's not humanly possible. We can't do everything. We can't grow everything on our homesteads. Now, some people might. If you have a huge 100-acre farm, then obviously, yeah, you can grow a lot that you need, but you would literally have no life at all. And a lot of people back then couldn't afford 100 acres. A lot of people are like us now who have maybe an acre, 3 acres, 10 acres, 20 at the most. My grandparents didn't hardly even have that. So while a homesteader might have a different definition today than it did back then, it really doesn't. We're really quite the same, just in a more modern way. In fact, a homesteader is somebody who just wants to be more self-sufficient, but also a homesteader is somebody whose focus is on their home. Cleaning their home, being a homemaker, taking care of their family, even if it's not a woman, it can be a man, taking care of your family, growing what you need as a sustainable resource. I'm not talking about meat birds that can't reproduce. I'm talking about having sustainable resources where you don't have to constantly buy animals to butcher every year. Having a sustainable resource for health, whether it's herbs or herbalism or herbal remedies, or just good nutrition. There are a lot of ways you can be sustainable, and that's what homesteading was always all about. Even though back then it was just their lifestyle, they didn't have a choice. They had to use everything that they had, but they didn't have to do it in a way where they were oppressed by it. It was just their life. They just did it. So whether you're on 100 acres with 1,000 head of cattle, or you're in a backyard suburban half-acre area in a subdivision, you can be a homesteader. And that's the whole reason we started Homesteaders of America. It doesn't matter how many animals you have, how much you grow from your property, when the ultimate goal is to be self-sustaining, we're all of the same mindset. We're all like-minded. We all want the same end result. If your objective is not to be self-sustaining, if you just want a few chickens and that's all you want, that's okay too. But ultimately, the homesteader's main goal is to be self-sufficient as much as they can be self-sufficient as possible. Now, for some people, that looks like they'll have solar power. But guess what? People back then didn't have solar power. So that's not a requirement for being a homesteader. You don't have to have 300 cans of food in your pantry to be a homesteader. Obviously, if that's your goal, that's awesome. You don't have to grow every single herb there is to be a homesteader. You don't have to milk a cow to be a homesteader. There are different types of homesteads now, just like there were different types of homesteads back then. There were families back then who grew a small garden for summertime use and a big garden for wintertime use. And then that's all they did. They would barter for different types of things, whether it was clothing or linens or meat or different types of produce that they needed that they couldn't grow. It was all about community, and that's what homesteading is about today. Building with each other, building something amazing, and leaning on each other, because the reality is that if you seclude yourself completely from the outside world and anybody who wants to help you, how are you gonna make it? How are you gonna make it? And it's boring. It's boring that way. So that's it for me today. I thought I would make a video. I've made a blog about it, but I thought I'd make a video today too, to just encourage you. Keep going on that journey. It doesn't matter what part of the journey you're on, whether you just have 5 chickens right now or whether you're almost to the end of your dream goal for homesteading. Doesn't matter where you are at in your journey or what level you're on, as long as you're trying and as long as you're loving on your community and building your homesteading community, that is all that matters. It's not a competition. It's not a race to the end to see who can finish. It's a journey, and it's a really awesome journey, and I hope you enjoy it. Happy homesteading.